I have a whole list now.
Oh,
Johnny
wonderful.
here, and your question was first on the list, Kyle. So we'll get started with your question. And feel free, I'll read it, and then if there's anything you want to add to it, let me know. But we'll go
Sounds
from.
good.
So the question is, what is your protocol regarding leash handling? How do you start your dogs on introducing them to loose leash walking? So for me, my famous answer would be it depends. And it depends on is this a puppy? Is this an adult dog? I would have a different approach potentially depending on what it is. We have another person. Oh, you just Johnny just chatted. Okay, so one of the foundational basics that I start with many dogs is putting the leash on and then literally standing still and letting them discover the end of the leash and what that feels like and the tension. And I get to introduce to them the concept of when they're limited. That allows me to see their mental state with it. Do they freak out? Do they shut down? Do they ignore it and try to pull through it? How resilient are they with that? And or how obstinate are they? If they're nervous about it or uncertain. So moving forward from that point, I need that information first to see where they're at in their mental state to then dictate how I would proceed. Because if I have a dog that's really sensitive, nervous, maybe a little shut down, I'm not going to just sort of plow ahead with a bunch of leash drills. I'm going to spend some time with them, maybe just dragging the leash around the house to get used to having something attached to them. And that foreign object isn't something that they have to be nervous or scared of. So that could be a starting point for some dogs. If you have a confident dog that it literally doesn't faze them, then I would start introducing very likely, oh, we're going to let Kathy in the room here. So I would start introducing them to pressure and release. So applying tension in a direction and just gently holding that until they figure out what to do with it. And once they start following it, the tension turns off. And so foundationally, this is one of the concepts that we want all dogs to learn and understand is that leash tension is communication and information coming from us. It's not something that's there to be opposed or to hold them back, just strictly hold them back. And a lot of people, when they're introducing the leash to their dog, they use it as a tool just to keep the dog with them, to keep the dog from running away. And so the dog's understanding of the leash becomes, this is just a thing that holds me back. This is just a thing that keeps me tied to you, which can be frustrating. And if I pull hard enough, you'll end up following me anyways. And so then they learn pulling is what gets them where they want to go. So that's why I would take it slow and start stationary oftentimes where they learn just to sort of hang out. And when they find the end of it and I apply tension back towards me just to get them to step towards me and then it turns off, they start learning that their choices, their actions and their movement are a big part of what the relationship to the leash is and that their choices matter and that they can work with it instead of having to just constantly be opposed to it. So that's an example. Kyle, does that answer your question or do you have a follow-up question on that?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That does answer my question. My certain situation that I have is with my personal dog, who's a big old bullheaded Rottweiler who's been living with me for 5, almost 6 years. I think I'm wondering if it would be advantageous for me to reintroduce him reintroduce him to the type of expectation I want with him with the leash. He's gotten so much better over the years, but I am still finding myself getting frustrated in how he he'll do this move where we'll be walking and then all of a sudden he decides to jerk, and then he'll knock me off balance, and then there's a conflict, and then we have to reconnect. So yeah, that's what my follow-up question would be. But that first part definitely answers a tremendous question moving forward with dogs that I work with when I
Yeah.
first meet them.
So with Titus, and his tendency to occasionally just veer off and go towards something he wants, and usually, right, it's usually something of interest that he goes towards. Yeah.
Yes.
So what that boils down to, I believe, is your timing of paying attention on your walks, knowing that he has this tendency, even though it's not happening every other step. It's, it's harder to pick up on because it's not happening all the time. But part of that is staying connected enough to him to know where his mind is at, to know when he's going to initiate that and catch it earlier in that action instead of waiting until he's already gone. And then you're reacting to his choice and you're a step behind him in that way.
Yes.
So that would be the challenge for you, would be to stay mentally connected and mentally present the whole walk, so that you can, the moment his mind changes, and he's going to give a slight signal, a split second before he does that. And if you can catch that moment instead of after he's veering off, and I know it happens fast, but that, I believe, would make a big difference.
Okay, I will definitely start there. I know my awareness and my mental presence with him on walking has improved drastically over the years, but I know that I have more to work on. So I'll practice with that.
Sounds good.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome. Welcome back, Kathy. Okay, we're gonna go to Johnny's question, which was right after Kyle's. The question is, how many dogs equals a pack to them? That's a cool question. I like that. My answer to that would be, if you have more than one dog, that's a pack. Now, there are different pack dynamics that can come with different numbers of dogs. Once you hit 3, that's a different dynamic. And then I've heard from others, I've never personally had more than 4, but once you have 7 or 8 or more, that's a different dynamic. And then 10 to 12 plus is a totally different dynamic after that as well. So when you have 3, you can still have, individual relationships, and they sort of play off of each other a little bit too. But once you start getting into that 8 to 10 range, you're going to have a more challenging time maintaining the same type of individual relationships with them, and they will influence each other. There's more of them to influence each other as a unit than you. And so that's a different dynamic to deal with. But on a fundamental sense, you have a pack if you have more than one dog, because that is their pack member. Technically, you guys, I would consider right now it's just me and my dog in our home, and I would consider us a pack. It's an interspecies pack. But anytime you have more than one individual, I think that's the baseline for it. So that's my answer to that. Any follow-up questions on that one?
No, that was really, really, really cool. I didn't know that about dogs.
Cool. Kathy, if you have any questions, I know you haven't written any in, but you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask them. Just let me know. It looks like you're unmuted, Kathy, but I can't hear you if you're trying to say something. I'm not sure if this is a tech issue.
Yeah, I think a tech
There we
issue.
go. I can hear.
Okay. I'm just a little bit behind time, so it's going kind of fast here.
That's okay.
To get ready.
Do you have a question?
No, I don't. I'm just right now just listening.
Okay, perfect. Not a problem. Okay, next question on the list is Johnny was asking about he wants me to explain the distance zones. I don't remember the name, but it's public zone, social zone, personal zone, and intimate zone, and why they are important. So I don't have them memorized by heart, but I did look them up in preparation for this call. And so thank you, ChatGPT, for putting out a great little like synopsis of it. So I'm going to read through that and we can talk about it because this is oriented towards humans, but conceptually it's pretty much the same. So I'll read through these 4 zones and then we can talk a little bit about that. So zone 1 is the intimate distance. So this is from 0 to 18 inches. This is like we're right next to each other. So intimate space. This is the closest zone reserved for people with whom you have a very close relationship, such as family members or romantic partners. It's typically reserved for private, personal moments. Violating this space can cause discomfort or anxiety. So everybody knows when someone's in your personal space, like we don't invite random strangers into our personal space. We don't like being touched by them. We don't want them standing right next to us. We don't want them hugging us. Even people that, you know, maybe we're not like, we don't have any issue with them, but it's just kind of weird. It's like, oh, this is, I don't know, you're in my personal bubble. So there's sensitivities to that with our species and most other species. Point number 2, personal distance. So this is 18 inches to 4 feet. So that's that next layer out from your intimate space. So this is personal space. This is still where you would have like close friends, acquaintances, and family. So this space is used for interactions with friends, acquaintances, or colleagues. It's still quite close, but it's appropriate for more informal or friendly conversations. It allows for comfort without too much intrusion. So having a nice one-on-one conversation with a friend or something like that, they can be close to you, but they're not overwhelming you or invading your personal space. Zone number 3 is social distance. So this is 4 to 12 feet away. This zone is typical in formal or professional settings, such as business meetings or when talking in a group. It's more comfortable. It's a more comfortable distance for larger social interactions, allowing for respect and a level of formality. So interesting wording here too. Respect and formality is happening in this social distance zone, which I would say instead of 4 to 12 feet, I would put it at maybe like the 4 to 10 foot mark. 12 feet, you know, might be getting into a different zone. But it gives you the idea of, you know, they can't reach out and touch you. They're too far away for that. And so there is that respect that's being given and formality. So that's something that I'm going to want to circle back to in a minute to talk about dogs as well. So the 4th zone is public distance, and this is 12 feet or more away. This distance is used in public speaking, lectures, when addressing a crowd, or allows for communication that does not require close interaction, where the focus is on the message rather than the personal connection. So pretty interesting things here. So when we want to relate proxemics or proximities to dogs with these zones, now, why are you smiling, Johnny? You're laughing.
Yeah, the word proxemics. Yeah, super
Yeah.
cool. Big into words and then just learning makes me happy. So
Good. Okay. I always love hearing where your thoughts are at. Okay. So we go back to our 4 to 12 foot zone or 6 to 10 foot-ish, give or take in that bubble. When it comes to dogs approaching humans and approaching other dogs, this is an understood zone. So let me take a step back. Humans innately understand this. If a stranger is approaching you, they really are strongly on your radar when they enter into that 12-foot zone or that 10-foot zone. And when they get closer to that 5 to 6 foot zone, now you're really paying attention because the threat level has gone up. So if this is a stranger that you don't know, you might be feeling a little off or uncomfortable about who they are. You don't know what their intent is. You don't know why they're approaching you. These are the spatial zones where innately, for survival, your nervous system goes alert, let's pay attention. Do we need to escape? Do we need to fight? we need to at least assess this and understand. Dogs have the same thing. That being said, you know, this example ended at 4 examples of 12 feet and beyond. There are additional checkpoints as you get further out, and dogs are typically more sensitive to those farther out checkpoints. You know, the 50 feet, 100 feet, and so on. So anyone or anything approaching, the closer they get, the more influential or the power to influence that they have over you, and therefore you're going to pay attention to that very differently than something that's moving away or far away. So, and there's also a difference between you being the one closing the gap or someone else being the one closing the gap on your personal space. So those are different feelings as well. But the 4 to 10 feet zone being the one of respect, this is something that applies to interactions dog to human. So if a dog is approaching another dog, they are going to start giving off certain signals at those distances. And they have an understanding of proper ways to approach and give friendly signals versus signals that are more threatening. And the word threatening here isn't necessarily the extreme threats of violence like growling and barking and gnashing of teeth. It can be just posturing. And that's still posturing and eye contact. Those kinds of things are still a form of threat, potentially. And so this is why it's not a good idea when you have your dog out on a walk, on a leash, you're passing a random person that has their dog on a leash, we're closing that gap of proximity, and the dogs just go right up to each other. They are entering into, they're blowing past social distance, personal distance, and right into that intimate space. And this is why it's not a great idea for dogs to meet on leash like that. And it's not necessarily a healthy expectation or a healthy way for them to greet or meet by going right up to each other's personal space. Ideally, we would see them interact more neutrally around each other at a bit of a distance first, and they're sending signals to each other in that way. So we'll go sniff the same tree, or we'll kind of move in generally the same direction, shadowing each other a little bit, but we're not directly focused on each other. Because when dogs do that, that's what we call a pro-social way of approaching for the benefit of everybody, the most respectful way to approach. And so they're communicating to the other party, I'm not a threat, I'm not invading your personal space, and I'm not crossing social boundaries with demanding that you allow me into your more intimate space too soon. So that's part of relationship building, even if it's going to be a short relationship for a few minutes, or a relationship that builds over time into a genuine friendship, even amongst dogs. And so what we see a lot with dogs is they're rushing directly into their space because we have prevented them from learning these things because we've domesticated them and isolated them from their species. So some dogs do not naturally understand this because they have not had the opportunity to learn it from dogs who understand this. So we're taking dogs at a very young age and we're isolating them in our home space. And then we take them to someplace like the dog park where all these other dogs have also been isolated. So when we look at it as a language, they're speaking broken English. They can barely communicate. And so they're all kind of doing their best and giving off these really bad signals, and things can escalate really quickly because, I mean, the first thing you see when a new dog enters a dog park, all the other dogs just rush to go greet it, and it's just bombarded with everybody. That's such an unhealthy approach. And it's an unfair situation to put a dog in, and they're blowing through all of these levels of proximity because they have not been taught to respect it when they probably don't even know what it is on some level, unless they've been shown by another dog or a person. It's been asked of them by a person who gets it. Because in a perfect world, like I was talking about earlier, the ideal approach would be they just sort of allow each other to exist in the same space, and they just sort of sniff things around each other and get sort of warmed up with who are you and who are you? And we kind of move on. And then they can evolve that into more direct, playful friendships, because play enters into that intimate space zone. And so it's not it's not necessarily a realistic expectation to put a couple dogs that don't know each other together and expect them to just start playing intimately right away. That can happen, and the dogs have adapted and learned how to navigate that a lot of times, but it's not a guarantee that it'll go well. So we've done a lot of things in our human society and how we live with dogs now that has degraded their language and their understanding of proxemics and things like that. And humans as well, we understand it on an innate level, especially when, I mean, another example of humans understanding it, you're in the grocery store and you're waiting in line to check out your groceries and someone stands like too close to you. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes for me, that like just makes me feel agitated on the inside. It's like, bro, like you could literally stand 2 feet farther back. You're not gonna get through faster by standing closer to me. And so, you know, we have this sort of social expectation of those proximities and what's appropriate and what's not. Additionally, I will add into that culture matters. There are other countries that have different perspectives on this. Some where personal space, their personal bubbles are much, much smaller, you know, countries where they're overpopulated and everybody crams into buses and crams into the, you know, public transit and or out in shopping malls or whatever, and it's shoulder to shoulder all the time. And that's normal for them. So that's something that is to be considered too, is the culture. And so dogs have adapted to our culture, but they're missing a lot of their own language of proxemics based on what we've sort of pushed them into. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but hopefully that helps. Let me know if you have any other questions. And I see you wrote in the chat here, so I'm going to read that real quick. Dogs' emotional state and feelings in comparison to humans. What are the differences and similarities? And is it apples to apples or something else? Okay, good question. Before I get into that, we have 6 minutes left, and I wanted to just throw out there, Kathy, if you have any questions that have come up, please feel free to let me know. Or Kyle, if you have any other questions too, let me know. And Johnny has amazing questions. I'm so excited to get to them, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance as well. All right. So, the emotional states are not apples to apples. They don't have the same range of complexity of emotions. They do have some base emotions that are the same as us, but what I can do is actually write this question in, and I'll cover it more in depth in the next Q&A, because I can get some of the information that I've learned this directly from the Canine Human Relationship Institute. So I'll pull that file out and get you some more exact details on why, because we covered this topic. And I think it's very interesting. But I'll give one example. Is jealousy is an emotion that humans can experience, and they think their dogs experience, but the complexity, the social complexity of what it is, dogs don't actually experience jealousy. So that's where a lot of times humans will misread a situation with their dog's behavior as them being jealous, when that's not actually the root emotion or motive for their behavior. And so the way that the human works with or responds to that behavior is misaligned with what is actually happening in reality for the dog. And so that can cause confusion, conflict on either end of the leash. So it's very fascinating to know a little bit more about these things, and to be able to eliminate that concept from our mind of like, okay, if my dog's not feeling jealous, what else could this be? And so that can open up the door to seeing things from a different perspective and understanding things a little bit more clearly from that point of view. Okay, a couple more minutes here. Let me pick another question. What to you is the goal that every dog can benefit from? Is it to be more pro-social? Yes, but I guess that it depends on the context that you're talking about. Because if I look at domesticated dogs as a whole, being pro-social is a good goal. I guess it's is it the goal for the dog or what's the goal overall? Because I would say overall, fulfillment is something that's extremely needed for all domesticated dogs. It's quite rare for people to properly fulfill their dog, and that in and of itself is one of the primary root issues of a lot of behaviors. Because they're not fulfilled, meaning they're often just stuck in their house all day or their backyard. And some dogs never leave the house or their own backyard. They never get to go on a neighborhood walk. They never get to go on a car ride. They never get to go to the park. They never get to, go other places. It's literally their home and backyard. It's like living in a prison, essentially, a very nice one. But when it comes to their life experience and their fulfillment physically and mentally, they live in what would be, I guess, considered a very sterile environment, because they don't get to experience the world. And so that's why when you have dogs that are in a very understimulated state, and then you take them out, they're overstimulated because they're not used to that much coming at them. Visuals, audible sounds, smells, all of it. And all of a sudden their nervous system is overwhelmed and they go nuts. And then the owners have a really hard time controlling the dog. And so then they take them back home and go, well, my dog just doesn't listen well. It's like, well, it's an accumulative process. If you were to more regularly fulfill your dog, then they would be able to regulate their nervous system better in those situations. And you would notice that your ability to control them, it would be easier to, because they're not going to be going as crazy. Their brain isn't going 100 miles an hour because it's been months since they've smelled something new or seen a new environment. So fulfillment, I think, is one of the top things that I would say is lacking in our culture for what we should be providing our dogs that we're not, because we've removed them from nature and trapped them in our homes and for our own pleasure, because we're not using them anymore. They're not being worked, they're not being used to hunt, to protect, to, be part of the farm or things like that. They're just our companions. And that's not going to satiate their needs as a species. So, literally just getting your dog out of the house is going to be a big part of what could benefit all dogs, so that they have life experience and they can learn how to be in the world and discover themselves too. I mean, humans are the same way. If you trap a human inside all the time, we develop depression and anxieties and, all kinds of issues. I mean, even people who have desk jobs that, they work long hours every day and then they're exhausted and underfulfilled. And then, because they're stuck inside, not able to move, sitting at a desk, and then they, go home and they watch TV and they go to bed and they do it all over again. And then on the weekend, maybe they'll get to go out a little bit, but it's just this cycle of underfulfillment. So humans have some parallels to that too. And And I think that's part of why we have a bit of an epidemic of mental health struggles these days. So that was my long-winded answer to that. Any other responses or questions on that before we wrap up? Nope. Okay, cool. Thank you guys for joining. I will be booking some more Q&As on the calendar soon, so I can get to the rest of Johnny's questions. Have a good night. I will see you next time.